Hello, everyone, and welcome to the September Florida Native Plant Society Lunch and Learn. I'm pleased to have Susan Carr here today to present on land conservation in Florida. She's in Colorado, of all places, and has agreed to present in the middle of her trip. So thank you, Susan. And then Lily here is for the discussion portion. So that's my coworker. Before we get started, I have a few events a few announcements and events that I would like to share with you. So in November, we have a couple of really cool events coming up. The Conradina chapter there on the right is doing their 16th annual Native Landscape Tour. You can get tickets. They're only $15, but they do usually sell out. This is worth a day trip, I have to say. And they're spicing it up this year. They're having plein air painters at every single stop. So I highly recommend going to this tour. It's awesome. And then on the left, we have Heartwood Preserve is running its first BioBlitz, which I'll be assisting with. They're a conservation cemetery up in Pasco County. So if you are botanical, as many of our members are, I hope that you will consider attending in November. And then October is Florida Native Plant Month. So there are too many events to list here, but most chapters have plant sales. So if you go to our website, fnps.org, and click on events, you can peruse all of the many hikes and events, including a really cool tour of Half Moon Wildlife Management Area. I've been lucky to be on a land management review of that place and paddle it many times. So I definitely recommend visiting that. Okay, and Susan? Do you need an introduction? I don't know. So Susan has been president of the Florida Native Plant Society. She has worked for a number of different land trusts. She's basically, I consider her to be an expert in land conservation in the state of Florida, in like the actual process of protecting land.
The sausage factory, yeah.
And fire ecology, she's really
that's
an expert in as well.
Thank you, Lily. Hi. Okay, should I just start or? Yes. Okay, let's do the tech stuff. Share screen. Entire screen. Whoops. Let's forget that part. And okay. Okay, can you see that? Okay, great. Yes, hi. My name is Susan Carr, as Valerie mentioned, and you guys have to bear with me. I'm not in Florida. I'm in Colorado, huddled in a hotel room, looking at the mountains on my laptop. So, and I forgot to mention this, Valerie, but about an hour ago, they were doing some pretty vigorous leaf blowing right outside my window. So it's all quiet now, but I hope it stays that way. If it doesn't, I'll just have to talk loud.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Yeah. So I don't know. I could run into the lobby or something. But anyhow, yes, as Valerie said, I've worked. I'm from Florida. I'm from North Florida, and I've worked in land conservation a lot from sort of several different angles. So today I'm going to talk broadly about land conservation in Florida, with particular emphasis on land acquisitions and land protection, since that's what I'm most familiar with. There's a whole nother probably seminar about land management for conservation and all that. I'll touch on that, but probably not go too far into it. Okay. And I'm affiliated with the Native Plant Society, and I'm actually the current Paynes Prairie chapter president, kind of taking a more local approach here. The Paynes Prairie chapter, located in beautiful Gainesville, Florida. And we have a lot of events coming up in October too. So it's a busy, busy month. Okay. Well, very briefly, what happened here? The history. Florida's landscape has changed so radically in such a short period of time, really. On the right, you'll see this is the pre-settlement map made by Mr. or Dr. Davis in 1967. oh shoot, I don't have a legend on there, but it's a very varied landscape of upland pines, large wetland complexes, swamps, and so on. And in by the mid 1900s or early mid 1900s, most of the uplands and a lot of the wetlands too were cut over, where the original timber was harvested for mainly to go up north to build cities and stuff. Longleaf pine is a very coveted, or was, for lumber and for masts and poles and that sort of thing. The turpentine industry was also loomed very large until about the 1950s. And I think the guy on the right there is making a cat face on a longleaf pine. So the landscape has undergone a lot of changes. By the 1930s or so, most of the uplands were the original forest and woodlands were basically gone. Very cut over landscape, but pockets remained. And of course, a lot of our ground cover vegetation still persists today. And so this map just shows the fragmentation of longleaf pine. Now, the right is the historic range. That doesn't mean longleaf was in every bit of that shaded area, but that was the historic range. And most of the uplands were did support longleaf pine before the pre-settlement times. The right map shows the kind of more or less the current distribution of longleaf pine in Florida. So it's pretty fragmented. There are some pockets, some strongholds you can see out in the Western Panhandle and that Eglin Air Force area and the Central Panhandle, and even there on the Brooksville Ridge, sort of in the south or the west central area. So, and then as we know, is a group that Florida is off the charts for in terms of biodiversity and endemism, especially plants. This map shows hotspots compiled by NatureServe nonprofit group, and I think these are index all endemic species and richness. So you can see that Florida has some of these hotspots, but it's mostly, a lot of it's driven by floral diversity and richness. So the Western Panhandle, the Central Panhandle, and the Lake Wales Ridge area there, and Southeast Florida and the Keys. So, we was it Dr. Reed Noss and co-authors have published some papers recognizing the Southeast and particularly Florida in the coastal plain as being one of the hot spots of biodiversity globally. So, oh, yeah, there's those things. Okay, well, so today, only about 3% of our native pine uplands are left in the Southeast coastal plain. And most of our uplands have been converted either for urban and residential development, which is a lot, but agriculture. We're a big ag state and timber. So I don't have the stats on that, but I think agriculture is our number 2 industry next to tourism. Big ag state, big beef state too. And then of course up here in North Florida, or where I'm not in North Florida, but North Florida is a big timber producer. And as we know, explosive population growth since the early 1900s or mid 1900s has really fueled a lot of the fragmentation and strains on our natural resources. And we're currently at, I think, 22 million and projected to 33 million population by mid-century. So growth keeps on growing. Okay, well, so in terms of land conservation, probably the number 1 threat is habitat loss and fragmentation, as you can see with urban development and residential, but also other things that come into play for fragmentation, like fire suppression and so on. Fragmented landscapes hinder migration, ability of plants and plant habitats to adapt to global, changing global climate and stuff like that. Of course, we're also, Florida is home to a lot of invasive plants And not only do they take over and crowd out our native plants, but the research is also showing that they can fundamentally alter ecological dynamics and community structure. Kogan grass has showed Kogan grass will burn, for instance. Prescribed burning is very important for upland pinelands. It showed that Kogan grass changes the dynamics of the fire itself, not to the benefit of our native plants. So we're, and then suppression of natural fires, I think, is also a huge threat to our native systems and stuff, especially in uplands. The historic fire regime has had a return interval of natural fires or even man-made fires of every 2 to 5 years. If you remove that, so much of our upland and wetlands are over or encroached by hardwood vegetation and non-natives as well. Okay. All right. Well, back to the development. Here's the big scary red map of projected development in Florida. This is from the 1,000 Friends of Florida, Florida 2070 mapping project. And so on the right, it shows developed areas 2010 baseline. So this is already 15 years old. And then the right map shows if on the current trend, let's put it this way, development trend, that's what the 2070 scenario looks like on the right. So you can see a lot more development in Central and North Florida, and even parts of the Panhandle, and of course Northeast Florida, which is developing like gangbusters. To kind of zoom in on Central Florida, thinking a lot of you guys are probably in that area. So what the 1,000 Friends people did is they modeled the current trend situation, which is the middle map, but then another scenario that put more resources into land conservation, but still had the same number of people. The population remained the same as the trend model. So it's hard to see, but there's more green. So you buy, you have more land conservation. There's more green on the right map, and the red areas. So the idea is that urban development would be denser and concurrent with more land conservation. So you would have more green, and then you would, I had an arrow, but well, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the big hubs would be more connected. The idea is if land, and I'm getting to the big connection part here, but if lands were purchased to connect big center hubs, like here's the Ocala National Forest and the Green Swamp. So, okay, but this right scenario, as they point out in the report, would require a big commitment to expanding land conservation and land protection in Florida. Oh, here's my arrow. All right. Well, just to sum up, I'm just trying to make it, why do we need more conservation land? Well, all kinds of it. I didn't even touch on water for an aquifer recharge, recreation, hunting, tourism. There were some studies done that show that our natural-based tourism is, kind of rivals that. Well, it's not as high as Disney or whatever, but it's a big industry in Florida. Conservation to allow for land management. You can't do a lot of prescribed fire on really fragmented landscapes. So you need some big, chunks of, natural or landscape conservation. Endangered species. We have a lot of endangered species, plants and animals in Florida, and in very high biodiversity, as I mentioned earlier. And then large mammals, bears are been in the news a lot lately. Well, they need big native or natural and semi-natural landscapes to roam and migrate. So, okay, so I'm trying to make the case that we need more of that. But so where are we currently? These data are a little old, but just kind of look at sort of maybe the relative amounts here. A lot of land is in public ownership in Florida, about 30%. And I say that includes lands that are owned by the federal, state, counties, all public lands, even privately owned conservation lands, and conservation easements. And I'll get into that more. Now, those are not publicly owned, but this figure owns this. This is wraps it up. So about 10 million, this number has gotten more up to about 10 million acres now. So about a third of Florida is in some kind of conservation ownership or status. For the lands that are owned outright, it's about half and half, state and federal. Because bear in mind, this includes, I hope you can see my cursor, big chunks of federal ownership. Eglin, and this also, the military lands are significant in Florida. So includes Eglin Air Force Base out here, 500,000 acres. Apalachicola National Forest, where lily stomps around and things around there, big landscape there. Ocala National Forest. So you see a lot of these are big federal ownerships. Osceola National Forest, the Everglades and Big Cypress down here. So in general, and then the smaller bits are more, in general, state-owned lands, state parks and state forests.
So Susan, before you leave this slide, you
Yeah.
said something about this land was owned, and then but your graph says state_fee and fed_fee.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So fee lands are, yeah, I'm using lingo here. Fee lands are kind of real estate lingo for that it's owned outright by the state or the federal. Conservation easement. So it's fee simple. Something's in fee simple ownership. That means that the owner owns all of the land rights. It's a conservation easement is where you basically, I was going to get in this later, but where you split the land rights. So they're kind of like two owners. One owner owns some land rights and the other one owns the actual land, the underlying fee ownership, we call it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah. So what I was trying to do here is that the blue bits are, still shows that of the conservation lands in Florida, the majority at this point are owned outright by the state, federal, or local down here county governments. But then the state conservation easement, that's kind of a relative amount of the conservation easements that the state holds. But the state doesn't own that land. They just hold the conservation easement. I'm going to get into this more later, probably kind of too much. So let me go in. Okay. Well, I want to talk about the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So this is an opportunity. This is something that probably most people have seen or read about. The little graphic on the right is the kind of stylized thing that's been around for a while, and it was made kind of famous by the expeditions. There were some people who trekked across wild Florida several times. The first mission was from the way down the bottom of the Everglades to Georgia along this route. And then the second one was from, I think this is the Green Swamp area, all the way out to Western Panhandle, Pensacola. So these intrepid people walked and biked and paddled and so on across wild Florida with a film crew, and then made movies about it. So if you haven't checked out the movies, I encourage you to. They're really interesting, and they kind of make the point that there's a lot to wild Florida, and for the most part, it can be connected. They're trying to show what it looks like in the eye of the bear or the panther that's trying to cross large landscapes and so on. So, but the whole thing has been around for decades, and it's really predicated on the Florida Ecological Greenways Network. And this is one of the early maps of that. And that is an effort out of University of Florida. Tom Hochter is the kind of the lead guy there. And those are really like maps and models and geographically GIS-based models showing how Florida can have a system of interconnected native, natural, and semi-natural landscapes to protect wildlife and so on. So that's the vision or the history. So I like to call to me, the Florida Wildlife Corridor is a conservation blueprint. And I want to stress that I talk to a lot of people and they think, so this thing, this multicolored thing here on the screen, that's all protected. Oh, no, 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 it's not. This is the blueprint. This is not a map of protected lands. And so this again shows actually the dark green are conservation lands as they exist now. And then the other colors are various priorities to build this wildlife corridor. The priority lands are not protected. They're not in any kind of public ownership or protection. But big milestone in all this is that in 2021, the state legislature and the governor approved the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act. And that is now law. That is state law. And it says, I encourage you to go read it because it's kind of interesting. It says that Florida shall try to build this thing right here. Okay. Doesn't say exactly how, but it says that Florida should, and that the primary mechanism by which to do it is Florida Forever, the program, which I'll get into later. But it also encourages, it has some language in there about, oh, the state of Florida should try to leverage federal funding and other sources of funding and payment for ecological services and pretty much everything under the sun to build this conservation landscape. Okay. Well, this is just to show that that the sort of the genesis of this Florida wildlife corridor, a lot was really based on like black bear habitat models, and in a GIS way, you try to map where bears are, where bears move, and where there are large tracts of natural or semi-natural lands remaining. And importantly, large tracts that are in large ownerships. Okay. Something gets divided up into, hundreds of different owners. You look at the tax parcel database and it's all fragmented. So this really was designed to kind of do, to take into account large mammal migrations and movements, ownership patterns, and remaining landscapes. Okay, so this is from our friends from the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation. And there's a visionary 18 million acre network of interconnected lands and waters that protect all that stuff. So that's their description of the Florida Wildlife Corridor. Okay, so it is visionary 18 million acre. Awesome. Okay. Of that 18 million acres, about 8 million of it remain unprotected in that they're not in any kind of, conservation status. The Corridor Foundation folks refer to this as the opportunity areas, which are mapped in green, olive green on the map. So those are opportunity areas, good opportunities. And of those opportunity areas, about 1.8 million acres are either recognized by the Florida Forever and or Rural and Family Land Protection Programs, state conservation programs, as priority for acquisition. So, and having worked with these state programs a lot, I'm more and more, especially with the passage of that law and all the great work that the Corridor Foundation and other folks have done to promote this thing. Lands within the wildlife corridor are top priority for state program conservation priorities. So, more and more we're moving to we're working on this, and I'll get into what does that mean if you're not in that. I'll get into that later. But I also want to note that this isn't the only game in town in terms of where conservation is prioritized and so on. There are many, many other conservation priority plans and landscape conservation plans at many different levels, state levels, global levels, local levels. I don't have time to go into all that, but just saying that there are some. Okay. All right. So moving on to the fun stuff. How do we build this thing? Okay, we have this plan. How are we going to build this thing, this Florida Wildlife Corridor? I'm going to kind of focus on that right now. Well, I mean, a lot of it's like, how do we turn dollars into acres, right? If building the corridor is really about 8 million acres of opportunity areas and so on, that's pretty much what it boils down to. So that's my formula right there. And there's a big toolbox in the middle. And I'm going to talk about the middle kind of a lot. Now, the source of funding in general comes from public programs, federal and state programs, county programs. Also, to a much lesser extent, private philanthropy and individual donors that might be working, say, with land trusts or something like that, or just buying land, conservation buyers. There's some of those around. And then this market-based programs, such as, and I'm not going to talk about that much except to say that this kind of runs the gamut of everything from species mitigation programs, where like the gopher tortoise relocation program is a big example of that. You could, argue that, well, I won't get into it, but that can protect land in certain cases where the gophers are coming to the recipient site. The recipient site can be protected. And those programs, although they're authorized by a state government and so on, they're very reliant on the market. So, you're buying and selling gophers, they're moving from a development area to a recipient site, and the receiver is getting paid for it. So another big example of this are carbon credits. And we don't even have enough time to go into that, but the whole national and global system of selling carbon credits could be used, or it could be a method or tool for land protection. I wouldn't say it's a huge thing in Florida yet, although there's probably stuff I'm not aware of. But again, that could lead to permanent protections of land with trees to sequester carbon. So, but I'm going to talk about the stuff in the yellow more. Now, the acres, that's turning the dollars into acres. It's a lot of strategy, and it's really strategic opportunism or opportunistic strategy or something like that. So it's really a mix of strategy and opportunity. And I must say, I'll stress this, till the end of time, the whole system is based on willing sellers. There is no eminent domain or anything not for conservation, not that I'm aware of. So it's all based on willing sellers, people who willing to sell land, conservation easements, or get into one of these programs willingly. So a lot of what I do and everything is trying to find those people too. Okay, so in the middle, you have sort of the facilitators of all this, land trusts. And I'll just say I've worked for a number of land trusts now. They are nonprofit organizations that are committed to land conservation and land protection. So they are all up in this. But also on the for-profit side, you have realtors working with these programs, the public agencies, doing outreach and stuff themselves. And even that whole process takes a lot of time and a lot of resources.
Don't forget about the lawyers.
Lawyers. Well, okay. Realtors / lawyers. Sorry. I don't mean to cut you're right. And then you have that sort of special case when they're both. Okay. All right. Okay. Methods. All right. I've sort of I've kind of rambled about this a little bit, but to kind of boil it down, you can buy land and hold it and manage it for conservation. And that's what the state does, and counties. A lot of Florida counties do this. This is where it's public ownership. So that's what it's public ownership, land protection method. Just buy it, manage it. The thing about that is, you can see it's costly. You have to buy the land, but you have the holding costs to manage it. And if you're really managing, you're going to be burning and trying to control invasives and all that. So the other ways are really private lands conservation. So conservation easements is the big tool for permanent land protection of privately owned lands. And this is where the landowner still owns the land, but some other entity holds a conservation easement and holds some of those land rights, which are basically extinguished. I'll get into that more. All of the entities do this: federal, state, county government, private land trusts. This is a big tool. This is a big one, for better or worse. I'll talk about that a little bit. And then, like I mentioned, these incentive programs for private lands. Now there are management programs, cost share programs to incentivize land management, stuff like that. Payment for ecological services that are administered through various government and private entities. Sometimes those lead to permanent protections for land. A lot of times they don't. They're just incentive programs for a short period of time or something like that. So mixed bag there for permanent land protection. Okay. All right. Well, I always get what is a conservation easement? So I thought I'd sort of detour on this just for a second. And Mr. Tortoise wants to know too. Okay. Conservation easements they're a legal instrument. They really are just a deed and a document. They're a legal instrument, and they are placed on privately owned lands, and they are for the public benefit. Okay. They're usually held or purchased or received through a donation by conservation organizations like land trusts. They have to be qualified too. Weirdly, they have to be qualified through the IRS. That's a whole nother bag of worms. But so qualified conservation organization such as a land trust or a government agency. Importantly, these properties that have conservation easements on them and agricultural easements, which I'll get into later, are in private ownership. They remain in private ownership. So it's still up to the private owner to manage the land, and he or she can pass the land to their kids. They can sell it. They can lease the land. They still retain all those land rights. But for the most part, a land with conservation or an ag easement on it restricts development rights and other incompatible land uses that are incompatible with conservation. All right. Okay, I'm going to get a little bit further down into it. So in the land conservation world, we like to think of actual land ownership as really a pile of different things, different levels of things. Sometimes people talk about the bundle of sticks. Well, this is my bundle of sticks, I guess. So, if you own a piece of land, you have the right to subdivide it, within laws. You have the right to do agriculture or mine it or try to mine it, use it, exclude the public. I mean, you have all these rights. Okay. So if you donate or sell some of those rights through a conservation easement, which is held and enforced by a qualified entity or a public agency, you are basically extinguishing those rights. The deed says these are extinguished rights. So, and those typically include subdivision, mining, commercial development, industrial development, and depending on which program, intensive agriculture. So that's the tool right there. But on the flip side, importantly, the landowner continues to have those underlying fee rights to live there, pass it to other people, do forest management, agricultural management, depends on what the program says, and keep it in the family, or many times have rights to do additional building and stuff for family use. Okay. All right. So there's different types. So you can either sell or donate a conservation easement. So some people donate conservation easements because their heart's really into it. They want to keep the land, undeveloped, and also they get tax advantages through the IRS. Now, I'm going to talk more about the programs that buy conservation easements, because this is really the growth sector in land conservation, the way I see it. So, and that's where the conservation easements itself has a value, which is established through an appraisal, and usually a public entity, public agency buys that conservation easement through a program like Florida Forever. Okay. All right. Well, advantages and disadvantages. I always get this question. So I figure it's like, well, the advantages are for the landowner is, it protects the land, keeps it in family ownership, especially if they don't want it subdivided and developed, and a lot of people don't. And it's also a ways to monetize those unused land rights. And so, especially if they're selling something and they get cash, and they can set up that trust for the kids, or they can use the cash for land management or whatever they want. So there are advantages for the landowners. And then for the public, it's a way to protect privately owned lands and sort of expand the breadth of the lands and the willing landowners, willing sellers, expand that those availability for land conservation. Now, a lot of what you hear is like, it's more cost effective. And I guess it is in terms of turning dollars into acres. It's it's cost effective because it costs less to buy a conservation easement than it does to buy the land itself. And the public agency does not have the management and holding costs, because remember, that still stays with the landowner. So this is a big, and I didn't put this on here, it does not take that land out of the tax base and for the property taxes. It does lower the property taxes, but doesn't remove it from the tax base. And that's a big political point, I think. Like I mentioned, more opportunity. There are lots of people who want to sell conservation easement on their family lands that don't want to sell the land itself, right? So it opens up more opportunity for that sort of thing. Currently, I looked it up just today, about 1.2 million acres in Florida are protected with conservation or agricultural easements. So you see it's a pretty significant chunk, and it is growing. All right, but what are the disadvantages? Well, the big one, a lot of one is, when I say eased lands, I mean those are lands with easements on them. There is no public access. It's still private land. Unless the landowner wants to grant public access, there is none. And believe me, like 99% of them do not want to grant public access. So, there's this argument that taxpayer money is going to buy these easements that remain in public land ownership. So a conservation easement doesn't require or prescribe proactively conservation management. Conservation easement tells you what you can't do. For the most part, doesn't tell you what you can or should do. So that's still on the private landowner. And a lot of times when these folks die and it goes to the kids or gets sold or whatever, you may not have a landowner that has that same, interest in burning that land or taking care of those invasive plants and stuff like that. So, and then there are the enforcement issues, especially when the land changes ownership. The holder of the conservation easement has to, monitor and enforce the restrictions of that easement. So far, for the most part, it's pretty boring. It's, it's a legal thing. It can wind up in court. These conservation easements have held up. They've been around since the 70s, and for the most part, they've held up in court. But then there's this whole issue about the durability of conservation easements themselves, which I'm just going to leave that one there, because that's a big topic lately about, can they be extinguished? We have seen that they are subject to eminent domain, just like fee lands are, privately owned lands. So there's that. And okay. All right. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the land eligibility and the programs that, set the pace, and some of the tools that we use. Okay, what about the conservation programs themselves? Who are the buyers for lands and conservation easements? Mr. Tortoise wants to know. Okay, so back to my equation. For all this stuff to happen, you must have a buyer. And so I'm going to focus in mainly on federal, state, and county programs. Those are, the big buyer of conservation easements and lands for conservation in Florida. Okay. Okay. So this is just an overview. I'm going to talk about federal, state, and local programs. Each one I'll try to get too down in the weeds or whatever. Each one has different goals, which I do want to point out, and then different processes. Okay, Florida Forever. Now, I hope everybody's heard of Florida Forever. It has been around since 2000, 2001, and it had a lot of precursors, the Carr program, Conservation and Recreation Lands, Save Our Rivers and Save Our Coasts, and even before that. So it's really, land conservation programs have been with Florida since maybe the 70s or 80s, sure, long time. But Florida Forever is now 25 years old. They're celebrating an anniversary this year. And it is the premier state land acquisition program. And importantly, it buys land outright. It's really about the only state program that does these days. And it buys conservation easements from willing sellers. Okay. The whole thing is based on priority models, much like the wildlife corridor. And you can see on the right, the yellow bits are Florida Forever project areas. So in short, to buy a piece of land, it has to be in a project area, Florida Forever project area. So it has to be one of the yellow bits. And those have gone through science and evaluation by state agencies and stuff like that, mainly in terms of their contribution to landscape scale conservation in Florida. And you can see there's a lot of overlap with the wild. I don't have a map of it, but there's a lot of overlap with the wildlife corridor. So to date, about 1 million acres have been protected through this program, 3.8 billion spent since 2001. And, you know, a lot of state forests and some state parks have been, you know, acquired through this program. There's a brand new state forest out in the Panhandle. I think Wolf Creek State Forest, I think, was acquired through this program very recently. Importantly, the funding comes from state budget appropriations. And so you know what happens there. Okay. The second biggest one is the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program. This is through the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, FDACS. Very important point where Florida Forever, the goal is, the goal is to protect environmentally sensitive lands and natural resources, in short. Here, the goal is to protect productive working lands. Very different goal. So these are agricultural easements. So I do want to make that bright line distinction. I may slip up and call them conservation easements, but they are agriculture conservation easements, agriculture easements. And they are to protect productive working lands like farms, ranches, and timberlands and keep them in production. So secondarily, second to that primary goal is the protection of environmentally sensitive lands and natural resources. And this program buys agricultural easements only, does not buy land outright. It's been around since 2001, but it just remains small in terms of funding now until recent years, which I'll show you later. It's really, really expanding. The little map on the right shows lands that are, okay, the little bit, you can see the little red bits. Those are on the acquisition list. There's a list of nearly 500 parcels that have gone through the ranking process and everything that are on that list for easement acquisition. So it's very competitive. So again, it's I think that the goal, so to protect agricultural land, but also keep them in family, you know, more or less family ownership for working lands. There's a whole eligibility process. The landowner has to apply and get evaluated and ranked, and that all takes about a year. It's very competitive too. So this thing has experienced, outrageous demand, which the Commissioner of Agriculture, puts out a lot of press releases about how much demand there is for this program. And importantly, I want to say it allows for all sorts of agriculture and land conversion for agriculture. So if it's for an agricultural land and you're growing trees, it's pretty fluid. You could convert that into row crops under this easement. It's just to keep it in agriculture, right? The federal programs sort of more the same on that. They're mostly for agriculture and productive lands. And they come through to us through the Farm Bill. And, amazingly, you didn't know it, the Farm Bill is the #1 funder of conservation programs that there is. And despite recent developments, it's still with us. And we're still operating actually under the 2018 Farm Bill. So, and that's all administered by the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. These programs, there are various ones. They provide usually partial, sometimes full funding to purchase conservation or agricultural easements. And sometimes they also like to match with other entities like the state or land trusts to collectively buy these easements. So, and also there are programs for land management. So a nice thing about farm bill programs too is you can couple them. You can have easements that are for long-term protection, and then some land management to help the landowner as well. Okay, so in short, the ones we deal with, there are two types in short. There's a wetland reserve easement. And so the thing is, I wanted to point out, these easement programs are not about going out and finding the most, beautiful, ecologically pristine, awesome, rare plant loaded lands. No, they're not. They're either for restoring wetlands, and there are a lot of these wetland reserve easements down South Florida, in the Kissimmee River area and the Everglades, for degraded wetlands. So the easements are in conjunction with wetland restoration. So that, don't think that these easements go out and find the beautiful, swamps and remaining stuff and, protect those. No, this is for wetland restoration. And then the agricultural land easements are mostly for working lands and productive grasslands. So ranch lands, grazing lands, and it's bigger, I'd say, in South Central Florida, in the kind of the ranch land areas. Not as much in North Florida. Okay. Well, so the big, I think, expanding, emphasis on land protection recently has come at the county level. And about a third of Florida counties have some kind of land protection program now. A lot of them buy conservation easements, and some of them buy land outright. Examples of some of the older ones are Alachua County, Volusia County. These have been around for, I think, going on 25 years now. I live in Alachua County. Alachua County forever has protected a lot of land. I don't have the number. So is Volusia County through those. And they're usually like Alachua County forever, Volusia County forever, Polk forever. You can see a trend here, sort of modeled after Florida forever. The program goals and eligibility really vary a lot by county. And interesting, so just in the last few years, some other counties have come online: Lake County, Monroe, Flagler. So some of these counties that are experiencing a lot of population growth are voting themselves a land protection program. And the county land programs are variously funded through tax. The voters vote to tax themselves, like we did in Alachua County, bonds, sales surtax, and so on. A lot of these come about through these ballot initiatives. And it's pretty amazing that I think the Trust for Public Land, who tracks this stuff, most of these things that make it onto the ballot pass overwhelmingly. So, and then most of them have county-based priority conservation plans. So, which you can find if you live in one of these counties and you want to find how they are strategizing their conservation. They usually have a conservation plan, online. What AI tells me anyhow is that all county conservation programs have protected about 500,000 acres in Florida to date. So collectively. Okay, then real briefly, there are other programs. Again, all different. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service gives grants to buy land mainly to protect birds, migratory birds, and in some cases imperiled species. Actually, the Native Plant Society benefited from this program a little bit, which I'll describe at the end. U.S. Forest Service has some programs mainly for protecting large forest lands. Not a whole lot going on with that, I don't think. And the other kind of big one in Florida is to protect military installations. It comes through the Department of Defense. So the Department of Defense actually puts a lot of money toward land protection, and I bet you can guess why, to buffer those military installations, because it turns out that land protection, land conservation is pretty compatible with deterring incompatible uses, like people who move right next to a base and object to the noise and call their congressman. That's incompatible. So I used to work with one of these programs, and it was really great as long as you were within 3 miles of the military installation. So it's kind of limited, but it's a good program. And then I talked a lot about protecting the land. What about after it's protected, especially on private lands? There are a number of programs and groups that help. A farm bill, again, is a large supplier of cost share programs for land management, which is pretty cool. If used correctly, it can help land managers, land owners, burn and do good forest management and control invasive species and give them some financial means to do that. There are also these prescribed burn associations that are really just landowner cooperatives that seem to be popping up around the state. And they're great for community and technical support. I work with the North Florida Prescribed Burn Association, and I'm a member. Right. So, all right. So you can see for the conservation landowner of, especially if you are wanting to continue owning the land and selling an easement, doing land management, it's really, really complex. And the thing is, it takes a long time. I don't think I've ever done anything in under 2 years, like ever. I think I did one conservation easement through Florida Forever in a year and a half, but it takes a long time. So you see the willing sellers, they got to have people that are willing to participate in all this, but they have to be patient and tolerant too. And so these programs, I'm going to go ahead and say, are not well suited for quick purchases, at least the state and federal, maybe the counties, not well suited for quick, acquisition of lands or, environmentally sensitive lands or whatever in the face of impending development, which usually is something that needs to happen in weeks or months. So not well suited for that, unfortunately. Okay. Well, what's going on with these programs kind of on the funding side? Well, Florida Forever has been crazy, as I think most people know. And I tried to chart you can see that historically, Florida Forever received $300 million annual appropriation, which is shown on the y-axis, every year. In that year, 26-27, I think there was a special appropriation for the Babcock Webb area. I'm not real clear, but that was a special appropriation thing there. So I put a star on it. So then, the Great Recession and some other stuff happened. The whole thing just crashed. And there were years that there was no money for Florida Forever. And then I don't know if everybody remembers the passage of Amendment 1 in 2014 that had language that people thought was going to assure predictable and full funding for Florida Forever through this dock stamp tax, which is still with us. And that didn't pan out at all, as you can see from the graph. So we've now kind of come up to about 100 million per year since 2020. I think the passage of the Florida Wildlife Act in 2021 kind of corroborated with that too. Now in 2023, I put that arrow, this is a weird one. So the 850 million. So there was about 100 million appropriated to Florida Forever, but there was also $850 million, never seen before, earmarked for two relatively small areas of Florida: the O2O connector or wildlife corridor in Northeast Florida and the Caloosahatchee area in Southwest Florida. That came through, that's really sort of the legislature picking projects there. And that was reconditioned infrastructure, or build back, federal money. That was, or COVID. I think it was actually COVID money coming from the Fed. So that was a one-off. Some of that is still with us. But like I said, it's not for the whole state in general. It's for these two very specific areas. And then this last year, this graph doesn't even show it. I'm sorry. But this budget year, Florida Forever was appropriate $18 million. So close to zero. So it's too bad. I was up in Tallahassee when they celebrated their 25th anniversary of Florida Forever, which was kind of a somber event, in light of the $18 million appropriation. So, but okay. On the flip side, the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, which is again buys agricultural easements on ag lands. Wasn't a whole lot going on there. Got a little bit of money in 2017-18 until recently, 2023. Got $300,000 off the charts, and then did very well this past year. With $250 million. So like I said, this one's really ramping up. There's a lot of demand. There's still way more demand than supply. So this is to protect our farmlands and food security and all that. Okay. So just a quick summarize. About 30% of Florida is in some kind of public land ownership or private land with a publicly held conservation easement. About half and half federal and state. Those federally owned are in big chunks, national forest, DOD, military installations. In my opinion, what is growing and trending with land conservation in Florida? Well, certainly the use of conservation easements or the purchase of conservation easements. So now we have about 1.1 million acres of publicly held conservation easements. And that is just growing. And if you follow the news and everything, that is growing. Fee acquisitions, just buying it outright, is on the wane politically and functionally. Having dealt with it a lot, it's becoming more difficult to do that for various reasons. Agricultural easements, this is booming. And so today there's about 250,000 acres through the Rural and Family Lands Protection Program, and then more through the Farm Bill. I didn't have a number there, but it's growing. County land protection programs, fortunately, and I really hats off to anybody who's trying to get a land conservation program going in your county. I think it would really be cool to see if some of these can be voted in rural counties, because what I've seen, they're mostly on the coastal counties or counties that are experiencing rapid growth, and I think people get kind of scared or whatever, and then they want to protect, areas in their county. This market-based conservation programs, which I mentioned before, and then private conservation buying. I didn't talk about this, but this is just people, philanthropic people or impact investor types, billionaires, all these sorts of people who are buying lands. And this is going on a lot in North Florida, probably less so in South Florida. And a lot of South Floridians coming up buying land in North Florida for conservation. And so they're buying the land to conserve it themselves. That does not guarantee permanent land protection, because that's only as good as the conservation-minded person is in charge, right? But more and more, they're buying lands with the plan to sell a conservation easement, which would put the permanent protections in place, or maybe even buy it to sell it in the future to a public entity for permanent conservation. So that's pretty interesting stuff that's kind of going on. What is not growing and trending? Florida Forever funding. And I think that's a big topic of Gene and the Florida, in the policy committee and the Native Plant Society, and federal conservation funding. Although the Farm Bill remains intact, a lot of other stuff has taken big hits, as we know, in this current climate. All right. Okay. So, and I just wanted to wrap up with the Florida Wildlife Corridor Conservation Blueprint. So on the map again, it's a great vision. I think this has really benefited land conservation a lot in this state, and it certainly has captured the public imagination and attention, and brought some of these big land buying people, to the table and stuff like that. So it's pretty cool, and I think it's a pretty good model. I mean, a really good model and a good vision. But what about the small disconnected lands that might have high conservation value, like where rare plants often are, in fragmented landscapes or places that are like developed or about to be developed? This, not so much. There's not a whole lot there for that. So I will toot the horn of the Native Plant Society. Believe it or not, we have stepped up in small ways to do small scale conservation for endangered plants. One of them being Weria and Plexifolia, which is the clasping stem Weria. Forgot the common name. And you can see what's going on with the little leaf there, clasping the stem. This is a federally endangered native plant that only occurs in a few counties in Central Florida, Marion County being the northernmost part. And Native Plant Society, Val was big in this, and bought 12 acres. You see the map on the right, it's kind of old, but to point out that that's 12 acres in a subdivision or a subdivision that's one of those partially built out subdivisions in Marion County. And there it is. And it's only 12 acres, but it's got a lot of these warea plants on it. So, and we're we're working with the Putnam Land Conservancy, who I understand contracted. They're doing land management right now. They were just out there, I think, last week, starting with land restoration management for kind of opening up the area to benefit the warea. Also, there are federally threatened sand skinks on the property, and we got money from the Fish and Wildlife Service through one of those endangered species programs that I very quickly mentioned to buy this land. Half to buy this land. The other half came from private philanthropy. So small scale, is it in the corridor? No. Is it connected? Sort of, but it's not building any great corridors or anything, but it's protects a little area for the plant. Another big, this is Lily. Lily should talk about this, but our efforts to encourage voluntary conservation of habitat for the Florida Torreya taxifolia. This is, I think, Florida's only endangered tree. It is a conifer, and it's in a very limited area, which you can see there. That's largely on private land, largely unprotected, although Torreya State Park has torreyas, and it's got all kinds of problems with the fungus and so on. So it's reliant on private landowners, voluntarily protecting this plant. And so Native Plant Society, along with Atlantic Botanic Garden, is working with this to encourage voluntary private land conservation. Okay. Well, my take home to wrap up is, there's a lot going for us in Florida. We have a pretty good plan and vision, and we have a lot of opportunity for future land conservation. It's very complex though. It's getting more so. It's just getting worse and worse in terms. I didn't even get into, leveraging federal funding, mixing federal and state funding to do stuff and everything. Really, really complicated. But it's also very much dependent. I mean, if we're going to build that corridor or do any of these other things, it's very dependent on state and federal programs for the funding. Absolutely dependent on willing sellers and conservation-minded private landowners. And I just wanted to mention the role of land trusts and other navigators. A land trust, here's a list of them. I think this is all of them in Florida. It's more or less complete. And yeah, I highlighted, don't pay attention to those arrows, but that I kind of tried to put the service area. It's kind of hard to map these guys, but in general, a land trust, which is a private nonprofit that is really dedicated to land conservation, both through private, donations of land and stuff, but more and more to facilitate some of these programs and to match conservation-minded landowners with appropriate programs. So they're really kind of a matchmaker role. And they tend to work in specific regions. And so if you're interested in any of this for your own land or any other reason, I encourage you to reach out to your local land trust. Okay. And I'm just going, land conservation is good for native plants. So that's a big reason why I'm here. Some pretty plant pictures for you. And that's it. Thank you. Oh my God, I talked a long time.
Thanks, Susan. The gang's all here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry for going too long.
Yeah. I mean, we still have quite a number of people on, so I'm really happy about that. Good job, guys. Thanks for sticking in. First question, we have Aaron Cork asks, who is responsible for managing the 12-acre area site?
Oh, yeah. Well, Putnam Land Conservancy, which is a land trust, they're basically our leasee. Maybe Melissa or somebody can answer this because I've been a little out of it, or maybe you can, Val, because I think they lease it and then they got a grant for the land management, right?
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah. So they
actually got a grant from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to pay for the land management. through
Right.
the Partners for Wildlife program.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, they're out there.
So Putnam Land Conservancy, I guess in short, is kind of running the show of the management.
You may know them from their small parcel preservation in that sort of like central northeast Florida area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, at Naya Creek State Forest, that kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, next question is from Vibe Circuit. Who to contact or talk with to get involved? I think I would like some clarification, Vibe, on what you would like to get involved in exactly before we answer that question. Okay, and lots of thanks. Richard Brownscombe from down
Hi,
south.
Richard.
Hey, Richard. Glad you're on. Great presentation from Sand. Jenny Stillbolt says, thank you, Susan. We have a question. Jeff Blakely is asking for suggestions for landowners in Miami-Dade County.
Ooh, that's hard because there's no land trust that I know of. And I always say go to a land trust. That's my go-to. Do you guys have it? I don't know South Florida. Anybody here have an idea? Everglades Foundation. I don't know. I don't know. Richard?
Well, Richard, yeah, but he's a little farther north, right?
Yeah,
He's not even
that's
in
true.
Dade chapter.
Gosh, I'm sorry. I don't know. You could reach out. You'd have to Google it to the. There is an Alliance of Florida Land Trusts, so they do have a website, I believe, and you could reach out to them or see if they have any resources on their webpage. Alliance of Florida Land Trusts.
I just Googled it and I do see there's a land trust of Dade County.
Oh,
I'm not
Oh.
familiar with.
okay.
And then there's also Dade Heritage Trust and South Florida Community Land Trust. I'm seeing, but I don't know anything about those organizations.
Yeah, I don't either. I'm sorry.
I've never heard of either of them.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
next, oh, go ahead.
Sorry. No,
Sorry, Lynn.
go ahead.
So Kimberly Gibbs asking the tough questions here. Are conservation easements enforceable? And if so, how? For example, an easement from a water management district. Do you want to get into this, Susan, or would you like me to?
I'll try, and somebody else can chime in if they want, but depends on who you ask first. Are they enforceable? Okay, I know it's been in the news lately, and there's actually a really good legal review article by, I don't know if you could post that, but McLaughlin.
Yeah, I can find it.
And that maybe that the question person had read that. The state statute says, which is the enabling statute for a lot of this, says that a conservation easement can be extinguished if the grantor and grantee agree to it. So the holder and the landowner. Basically, it doesn't say anything about judicial proceeding or court order or anything like that. That said,
and some other conditions, including linear facilities, such as the Sable Trail pipeline, such as toll roads, other kinds of facilities.
Well, there's eminent domain. Yeah, I mean, that's
outside of eminent domain.
Yeah, outside of eminent. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
written within the conservation easement statute. These weaknesses are written into the conservation easement statute,
right?
Which they are not in other states.
That's right. So it's a weakness, and I agree. And then this law review article goes on to say, and she points out that there was, and this happened. It happened in Lake County. One got extinguished, and it's a whole story you can read about. It's really, and it was a water management district. The water management district held the conservation easement. The original guy who donated it or something was gone, and then the next landowner, which happened to be a nonprofit, by the way, wanted to extinguish it to sell the land for development or whatever, and they did it, and it happened, and that's the case study in the law review article. And I guess some other things have happened. Also, things have happened with regulatory easements, but I'm not going to talk about that because I don't even really understand those very well. So I'm just talking about more the traditional conservation easement. That said, about the weaknesses of the state statute, Florida Forever, rural and family lands, in the deeds themselves, in the actual document, it says that the termination and extinguishments clause says that there has to be a judicial proceeding, has to be decided by the court. So in those, and Gene has been studying a lot of this, if he wants to say, in those documents, it calls for something more strict than the statute does. How that holds out, I don't really know. I'm not a lawyer. The other thing is that these federal easements have more, I think they're tighter, more rigid for the terminations. And then also we work in the county program. I think some of the counties are worried too, because the state statute is their enabling, statute. So then if it's on the private side, if somebody's donating a conservation easement to a land trust or whatever, that is between them and the IRS. So I think it's a little stricter too. And usually in that deed, it says there's got to be some kind of court order or something to extinguish it. There's my very long answer. That's not very, black or white. So
a lot of nuance there. I think that was really good answer. Thank you, Susan.
Yeah.
I would like to add that, not all easements are Florida Forever easements. Like, for example, a Carl, program, or Save Our Rivers, Save Our Coastlines, or Preservation 2000 easements do not have that clause in them. And a lot of those easements are held by, for example, a water management district. To Kimberly's question, each of those entities, say the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, Florida Communities Trust, not an easement holder, but administrator of restrictions on conservation land, or the DEP, who holds conservation easements, all of them have procedures for getting rid of conservation easements, whether in whole or in part. And many of those involve staff and board. And so the level of enforcement depends on the political climate of the board, the makeup of the board, and of course the conditions under which the staff are working.
Yeah.
Kathy Beal says, "Hi, Susan."
Hi.
Oh, Sally Lieb retired from managing Silver Springs, now living in Alachua and getting involved in Big Scrub NPS. Hope to see you sometime when you're back in Florida.
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll be back next month. I'll see you then. Thanks.
Charlie Pioli, who's Orlando-based, asks if there's a database of Florida land that is environmentally sensitive for purchase, specifically sensitive ecosystems.
Whew, well, short answer, no. Not okay. You can go onto the Florida Forever website and drill down into all those reports and stuff and see maps and so on of the Florida Forever project areas. And those are the areas that they've deemed important. Do they have a list of actual parcels? I doubt it. I don't think so. And do they have a list of people who willing sellers and stuff like that? No. I mean, I don't even know if that's it. So that's a lot actually what land trusts do. And people like me, we just go try to find the willing sellers, especially if they're in those areas. So that's a long answer that yes, you could, and you could probably derive the list yourself if you just looked at a map of their areas and all the tax parcels in there and stuff like that, or the ownership. And they may have that. I really don't know. But yeah, things where that the person is willing to sell something. No.
You may be able to look at, like, if you look at a Florida Forever area, there's a report that comes out every year with the Florida Forever areas, and you can look at the map. And you go to the property appraiser, especially if you're good at GIS, to identify the parcel numbers, and you had all the background layers. That would make it very easy. And then you could look at those landowners. And this is the process of what land trusts go through, right? They might hire, someone like me or like a GIS person to look at those and make lists of landowners, contact them. It's Susan's many.
And I will, so there are some efforts that are kind of more like this O2O wildlife corridor. I don't know if you've heard of this, but especially, I said the big number, like they have like $400 million of, to spend in this 1 million acre area. Well, that's a case where it was pretty inspirational to get all the land trusts and even some of the, agency folks or whatever to do this, to do a big compilation of ownerships. And then North Florida Land Trust and Putnam Land Conservancy just saturated the landscape with letters. So you're trying to get the willing sellers in this area. So there are cases in a specific area where this has happened. Counties may do this too. I'm not really sure. I can't speak to all counties, but in these kind of smaller areas, yeah, are they kind of tracking who's what and where and what they want to do? Yeah, I think so. And then furthermore, they try to, I feel like so much what we do is reactionary. Like, oh, somebody might call me because they want to protect something. Are we doing a whole lot of, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Are we doing a whole lot of like, we're going to try to connect with every landowner in that place over there? No, except for some of these exceptions like the O to O. Not that I know of.
Yeah. There are states that have embarked on reforms for their conservation general landscape, like making uniform policies for conservation easement release or modification, and instituting a state agency responsible for tracking all the conservation easements in the state and their status, whether or not they're being monitored. And so that might be an agency that would do something that Charlie is asking, track, like FNA does, track which lands are very sensitive, endangered species, and then, are they for sale, that kind of thing.
Well, that's true. I shouldn't give short FNA, Florida Natural Areas Inventory, which is a state agency. I think they're actually part of FSU now, but they track a lot of stuff. They track locations of rare things. And yeah, so there is a lot of, Florida is a pretty data rich state in terms of our natural resources. And yeah, thank you for that point.
So Gene can't chat, but he does want to ask you, do you have any idea how long it would take to purchase the approved Florida Forever projects if funding remains at $18 million per year for the foreseeable future?
Oh, purchase what? Anything or
the remaining Florida Forever projects?
Oh.
Could it happen?
Well, I mean, 18 or what was this, 18 million or 18 billion? I don't think there's. I guess I don't. I mean, those Florida Forever reports, those 5-year reports that come out, sometimes it seems like they do put $1 per project is like acres remaining and dollars that it would cost to finish this Florida Forever project area. Now, those, I don't pay too much attention to that because those are usually just the tax appraised value, which is not a good indicator of market value. So, but I don't have a number right up, but 18 million. I mean, 18 million might buy 2 things. I mean, it's like, it would take infinity time. There you go. Infinity time. There you go. Infinity. The rest of end of time.
End of time. It would not occur.
Yeah.
The asymptote is, it would just not happen. So Vibe Circuit did clarify their question. Okay. How do they successfully restore and conserve a parcel of land? I have no idea where to begin.
Oh, how Vibe Circuit?
Yeah, they want to get who to contact or talk to successfully restore and conserve a parcel of land. It depends on the parcel of land, right?
I don't know where it is, but okay.
Hopefully they own it already.
Yes, if you already own it, that shortens the process.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, if you already own it, and you need, I think a good place to start, and I have no idea what part of the state you're in, is Florida, FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Florida, is that FWCC? Florida Fish, and maybe you could put it in the chat or something like that. And they have a landowner assistance program. I think Gene used to be one of these guys. And so they have biologists that go talk to private landowners a lot about how to manage their land. And furthermore, they can probably help get funding if funding's available through a cost share program, say. So that's where I would start with FWC. And I guess, I don't know who depends on where you are, but there are different regions of FWC, and I'm sure it's on the website for private landowners to contact. Landowner Assistance Program.
And then if you don't own the land, do you have the money to buy the land? Is the land for sale?
Yeah, if you don't own the land, what is our whole system that we're based on, landowner rights and stuff. I mean, sometimes I get calls about like, there's some land that y'all need to do something or whatever. And it's like, well, do you own it? No. I mean, unless the landowner, I mean, I can't do anything unless the landowner. So, yeah, if you don't own the land, if you lease the land, you might be able to get some help even through this landowner assistance program or a farm bill program. Oh, I guess I should also mention Natural Resources Conservation Service has district conservationists. So that's the federal USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. They're pretty much just going to try to get you into a farm bill program, but they can help you. The district con can help you with that, depending on where you are. Now, bear in mind, NRCS has taken a 30% workforce reduction hit in the wake of Doge. So, there's that.
Yeah. On that same vein, Deborah is asking if one can purchase a parcel of land or several within development subdivision and use it for conservation, parentheses, not build on it. Do you need a special easement for this?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, if the land's for sale, I don't, Putnam Land Conservancy actually does
This is what they do. This is what
they do. Yeah. I mean, if it's for sale, and unless there's like some deed restrictions or covenants or some HOA thing or whatever, aside from all that, I don't see why you couldn't.
I mean, that's what we're doing in the Wary area.
Yeah.
Like, here's this piece of land. Can we get the money to buy it?
Yet. What?
What are they going to do? You're not allowed to not build on it. You're allowed to not build on it.
Yeah, I don't think so. Again, if there's an HOA or some kind of special covenant situation or something, HOA rules can be wacky. So you got to, be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. The problem is usually money, right? So, okay, so let's take a small, a small parcel, like say it's $100,000. Do you have $100,000? You're going to get a commercial loan for this $100,000. You're going to pay it off, and your heirs are going to say, like, what are you doing with this $100,000 that you could be put into a property that can appreciate in value instead of depreciate? Because they say, oh, nice work, burning that area for 10 years until you die, and then they sell it. So,
well, that's true. So if you want to, I guess, to kind of build on, if you want to buy a piece of property and do a lot of great restoration on it and everything, I see this all the time. And then you're like, you're getting up there in years and everything, and maybe you can't, and you've done all this work. Oh my gosh, what do you do? Well, if you're going to pass it to your kids or somebody else or whatever, you got to have some faith that they're going to carry it on. But if you want to make sure that the future owner can't develop it, you can put a conservation easement on it for the most part. If it's small, you probably have to donate the conservation easement because it probably isn't a program that's going to pay you for it. If it's a bigger property or a special property of some sort, maybe you could sell a conservation easement. But it would have the effect of disallowing subdivision and development on that property.
Right. You guys are so smart. Great questions. Loving all this.
Yeah.
Danny Young says, I have seen conservation easements removed by St. John's River Water Management District. And those are typically required for wetland mitigation. So they have to mitigate the current impacts and the impacts from the original project. So this is just happening, and there's not really anyone like tracking this in a sort of comprehensive way that I'm aware of.
Yeah, good point. The other one I worry about is conservation easements can be amended. So think about it as something kind of restrictive. I think I saw that. I don't want to say too much, but I think I saw this in an appraisal report that it got sold to another landowner, and the district held the conservation easement, but it was amended to allow cows and stuff.
Right. So I think there's not very much extinguishment going on, but there's a lot of amendment going on in Florida, and I think has been going on for a long time. I would like someone to do some research on this. So Sand follows up with that question. So despite the conservation easement removing the right for commercial development, industrial structures, etc., there's a clause for all conservation easements to allow development for toll roads. So the clause, let's specify, the clause is not in the conservation easements. All conservation easements say perpetual. The conservation easements themselves look really nice. Yeah. They say, really nice things about what the landowner wants for the most part, and they may say things like, in Susan's example, they might say cows in certain places. There's going to be maps for like building envelopes and these other things. And they don't say, yes, bueno, toll roads, pipelines, etc. But they are all enabled by Florida's conservation easement statute. Just like conservation easements in Maine are enabled by Maine's conservation easement statute, just like conservation easements in California are enabled by California's conservation easement statute. And so it doesn't really matter what's in the conservation easement itself. It matters what's in the conservation easement statute, and it matters what policies for the agency that's holding that conservation easement.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, currently in the state of Florida, the answer is yes. Should the answer be yes?
No. That's the next lunch and learn, and you should do it, Val.
Jean can do it. Maybe we could do a lunch and learn on our policy priorities for the 2026 legislative session, which is coming up.
I sure need to learn more about this because I don't, I'm not a lawyer and everything, but I'm just, I know a lot of them. Yeah.
So Sam says there's no way around that clause at all. Well, do you know the way around things that are in state law is to get the legislature to change the state law?
Yeah.
How good are we at getting the legislature to change state law?
We being the Native Plant Society?
We being, the general conservation community.
Not great.
I mean, it's not that we lose everything, but we don't get a lot of bills, positive bills.
Well, that wildlife corridor bill got through.
We get lots of good bills, but then they get amended, right?
They don't make it.
They find
to the
loopholes around them, right? So,
yeah.
The point. I think it's a pretty well-known fact that it's a bipartisan desire across Florida to conserve wild, intact land, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet that doesn't get done. That
right.
Almost everyone out here wants that, and yet we're not the ones who are the biggest donors to the politicians' campaigns.
I think we ought to work at the county level. I say that, and I live in a county.
City and county, yeah.
City and county, yeah. I didn't even mention city, yeah.
I mean, you live in a very responsive county, though.
Yes, I know.
And most people do not live in counties like yours, where the county commissioners listen to things you have to say.
Yeah.
Right. So, yes, you should work with your county.
Well,
no, but think it's worth we got to get programs set up in Putnam County. That's what
and if more people across, party lines showed up to their county commission meetings, talking about land conservation and sharing, their experience and sharing that desire to see their lands conserved, there's nothing bad that is going to happen from that, right? That can only be a net positive, because the reality is that all three of us have gone to city and county commission meetings, and we know how few people show up, how few people out of that county even know when their commission meetings are, right? So just showing up and being a person who is saying, I voted, I've voted in all of the last elections, and this is what I care about, and I want to express that desire to you, and I'm really upset about this project or that project or whatever, is really important.
Yes. Sure.
Jean,
and writing a personal email or making a personal phone call is also great, but showing up at those meetings is really important.
Yes.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah. And that's FNPS members are really well situated to do that. In my opinion, all the FNPS members I've met are some of the most knowledgeable people on land conservation, native plant issues, and local issues as they know it. So, if you're interested in getting involved.
And when you speak at a meeting, introduce yourself and share your credentials.
Yes.
Yep. So Jean wanted to clarify that one of FNPS's priorities for the 2026 legislative session is to codify in statute that a conservation easement cannot be extinguished without judicial determination, that the conservation benefit can no longer be achieved. So currently, if someone extinguishes or modifies a conservation easement, other than the potential for a public process at that agency's board meeting, there's no one designated to stand up for the conservation benefit, except for members of the public who may be disturbed by the action. And their opinion may be given some weight depending on who's in that board position, or they may not be given any weight depending on who's in that board position. And so in other states who have enacted conservation reforms for their entire state system, they have put in basically a public defender for the conservation benefit inherent in the conservation easement.
Yes.
So a very positive
Sorry, I
reform.
realized my thing's not plugged in. Go ahead. All right.
Oh,
Much better.
you're very backlit. Okay, so that
Yeah.
does appear to be it for questions. Danny Young points out that Cape Coral Wildlife Trust is doing what Putnam Land Conservancy is doing, but for burrowing owls and for pawpaws. So good job, Cape Coral Wildlife Trust.
Awesome.
One
That's
thing-
great.
Oh,
I
sorry.
mean, this small, yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry to interrupt the good news. One thing I wanted to add too was for everyone who isn't aware, there's a Senate Bill 180 that passed recently, and that bill is making it harder to conserve areas or prevent development by local lawmakers. And it actually opens them up to potential litigation if they try to prevent development in some manners. So everybody should look up that bill and know about it. And we're going to, as FNPS, we're going to be working on advocating against that bill as well.
Good.
Right.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll be working on this afternoon, going to meet with Jean after this about getting ready for these legislative delegations. So we have a legislative session, which happens at various times in the beginning of the year. So the legislature meets once a year, the 60 most dangerous days for Floridian, their property, and the native plants of Florida. And so that usually happens January, February, March-ish. And then before that, they have committee meetings, et cetera, et cetera. But even before that, starting like now, some have already happened, legislative delegations where the people who are in office go and they sit, usually in the county commission chambers, and they listen to people talk all day. And I mean, and that's the point, is that it should be you talking about something like Senate Bill 180, conservation easement, statute weakness in Florida. And so I'm going to send out an email, and you can prepare to attend your legislative delegation with priorities that matter to you and us.
There's one last question, Val, from Charlie, which says, hypothetically, if you had 10 million, which land would you purchase for conservation in Florida?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd
No
probably be
speaker.
in North Florida because I'm extremely biased. No, I don't know. 10 million bucks? Well, I mean, there's some lands I know really well, but I mean, that's like, I mean, if I were to do it on a more science objective way, I guess I would try to look at the greatest concentration of rare plants or something, you know. Actually with $10 million, I guess I'd probably try to do more small scale stuff because that's where the big gaps are, you know. I think that's a hard question. Yeah, I would buy uplands. I probably wouldn't get very many uplands, but I would buy some sandy uplands that have gopher tortoises and rare plants on them. I mean, these big swamps and big wild and connected, or big wet and connected. That's a big wild, wet and connected. Wet. Yeah, wet. All right. Yep. That's where I'm really like that whole corridor and everything. And I should probably do this sometime. How much to that is actually dry, sandy uplands? It's probably not very much.
It's not very much. Yeah.
Yeah, not very much.
Yeah. So 10 million would get you, a couple of
acres.
small parcels, Yeah.
No, I'd buy a spoil island off of the coast of. Oops.
I would say, I mean, I'm partial to the Panhandle because I'm up here, but uplands along the Alachua River.
Yeah.
There are a lot of timber companies that are kind of leaving the area now, and that's a biodiversity hotspot. And then the Western Panhandle is getting bought up and developed at a rapid pace, and it is very diverse and incredible, beautiful land and habitat that needs to be protected.
Good answer. In fact, I already have bought land in the first place you mentioned. So yeah, I guess I put my money where my mouth is on that, but that's just Susan Carr Land Trust. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have, the Susan Carr Land Trust. We have the FNPS Land Trust. So we've made decisions. So FNPS made a decision. Ocklawaha area, Warea, and Plexifolia, right? So we made that decision to put that money. And then Susan was like, Panhandle, Sandy, Uplands.
Yeah, a lot because of what's going up there with the Torreya and the Lily's work, and she keeps finding stuff. I bought a little 80 acres. She walked out there and found 2 federally endangered species the other day. What?
There's so much up here that is overlooked, and some of that timber company, I think a lot of these timber companies are planning to sell to the state, and they're already, kind of probably some discussions happening on that. But there's a lot of smaller parcels, like you mentioned, that include some of these really unique limestone glade habitats, where there are only like a dozen or so of these limestone glades. Some of them are on properties that are exceptionally diverse. And man, if I had $10 million, I would be buying up a lot of land.
There you go. If I had $10 million, I guess I'd just give it to Lily.
Yeah, you can give it to me.
Yeah, that's my answer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was
Did everybody leave?
Awesome. A lot of people left.
Oh.
We went long.
But this is recorded and it will all be saved on YouTube.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're here and you're just joining, or you want to go back, it's live, and you could just drag the slider back to the beginning and watch the video again.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So next Lunch and Learn is end of October, and it should be pretty good. So mark your calendars, and don't forget to do Native Plant Month stuff with your local chapter. Go on some field trips, and find a plant sale. So thank you, Susan. I know you worked really hard on this on vacation.
Yeah, I'm sorry it went so long. I get to talking about this stuff. No concept of time.
Well, it's also a very complex, complicated topic, and you summed it up really well. So thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go. I gotta check out this hotel, so I guess.
Thank you.
All right. Hey, I'm glad the internet kept going.
Yeah, I mean, you stuttered a little bit. Otherwise, it was fine.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, it was like this hotel internet situation. Yeah. So. Yeah. All right. Thanks. Again, sorry it was so long.
You did great.
Next time I'll cut out, if there's a next time, I'll cut out all that intro stuff.
Yeah. We could do an update on land conservation in like 2 years or something with what's happened.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.